She didn't look up when the hammer slipped from her hand and landed in the dirt. She just sighed, wiped her forehead with the back of her sleeve, and moved to pick it up again. Her hands were blistered, her arms trembling, but she kept lifting the next log into place. One log at a time. That was the promise she'd made to herself the night she ran from the town that had mocked her, whispered about her, told her she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or welcome enough to build a life of her own. But she had bought this small stretch of land with the last of her money, near the foot of Eagle Ridge, where the wind was cold and the loneliness even colder. Still she worked. She always worked. Because this little cabin was going to be her freedom. She didn't hear anyone approach, not the footsteps, not the horse, not the quiet rustle of a coat. She only felt a presence, large, still, and silent, watching her from the tree line. She slowly turned. A tall rancher stood there, reins in one hand, hat shadowing his eyes, dust on his boots from miles of riding. He was built like someone who rarely spoke but carried entire storms inside him. The kind of man folks whispered about in town but didn't dare talk to directly. His name, she remembered faintly, was Colt Mercer. The silent rancher. She had seen him once at the mercantile. He never said a word. People said he'd lost his wife long ago and had turned quiet afterward. Some said he had no voice left from grief. Some said the world had broken him. But he spoke now. In a deep, steady, quietly thunderous voice, he said, "Need a partner." Her breath hitched. She looked behind her as if he might be talking to a ghost. "I what?" she whispered. He nodded toward the half-built cabin. "You're building it alone." Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. He had probably seen her struggling, probably seen her nearly drop the log, nearly fall off the roof beam, nearly cry behind the stack of lumber. "I know it looks bad," she muttered, brushing dirt from her hands, "but I can manage." He didn't argue. He just stepped closer and placed his horse's reins on a stump. Then he picked up the massive log she had been wrestling with all afternoon, the one she couldn't lift past her waist, and set it into place like it weighed nothing. She blinked hard. "You don't have to." He held up a hand, quiet but firm. Then he returned to the pile and lifted another log. She stood there speechless, her heart beating too fast for comfort. "Why?" she finally asked. "You don't even know me." He paused, leaned on the log, and met her eyes with a look steady enough to silence wind. "You're alone," he said. "I know what that feels like." She swallowed. That was all he offered, and yet it was more honesty than she'd been shown in years. For the next hour they worked side by side. He lifted, carried, and set. She hammered, measured, and secured. They didn't talk much. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't comment on her mistakes or her stubbornness or her trembling hands. He simply worked like he'd been waiting for something to do for years. When the sun finally dipped behind the ridge, she exhaled deeply. "I owe you," she said softly. He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." She studied him, the scars on his hands, the quiet loneliness in his eyes. People don't help for no reason. He removed his gloves slowly. "I'm not people." She almost laughed, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. The man was a mountain, and mountains didn't explain themselves. She invited him to stay for a simple meal, beans, hard bread, and a pot of coffee boiled over a small fire. He accepted with a small nod, sitting cross-legged across from her. For a long time they ate in silence, until he finally spoke again. "You built all this alone." She nodded, every board, every nail, every mistake. "It's good work." She raised an eyebrow. "It's slow work." He stirred his coffee. "Slow isn't bad." She stared at him, feeling the warmth of the fire and something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not attraction, not yet, something older, something safer. Recognition. "You're not like most men," she murmured. He didn't flinch. "And you're not like most women," he replied. She froze slightly, waiting for an insult, a joke, a backhanded comment like the ones she'd endured in town. But instead he said, "Most would have quit." Her throat tightened. "I don't quit. That's why I came." She blinked. "You came because I didn't quit." He held her gaze for a long, quiet moment. "Yes." The fire crackled between them, orange light flickering across his jaw. Before she could form another thought, thunder rumbled above them, real thunder this time, and rain started spitting down. She scrambled to cover what she could, but the half-built cabin didn't offer much shelter. She grabbed a tarp, struggling with the wind. Suddenly he was beside her, taking the other end. His hands dwarfed hers, steadying the tarp, pulling it tight, securing it with rope he had taken from his saddlebag. Rain whipped around them, soaking their clothes, but still he didn't rush or panic. When they finally ducked under the small, dry corner just as the downpour broke open, she found herself shivering. Without a word, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. I don't need." "Take it," he said quietly. She pulled it tighter, the warmth flooding through her. For a long moment, they simply stood there, breath mingling in the cold air. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered, almost afraid of the answer. His voice was low, almost gentle. "Because no one was kind to me when I needed it." Her eyes softened. "And because," he added, jaw flexing slightly, "you remind me of someone." "Who?" she asked, heart thudding. "Myself," he said. Lightning flashed across the ridge, and in the burst of light she could see the grief etched faintly into his features, like the echo of an old wound. She wanted to ask about his past, his lost wife, the silence he carried like armor, but instead she said the only thing that felt right. "Will you come back tomorrow?" He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he simply looked at her with those steady, storm-weathered eyes. And said, "I said I'd be your partner. I don't walk away from that." Her chest tightened in a way she didn't expect. In a world full of broken promises, here stood a man who spoke so little, yet every word he uttered was a promise. And he kept promises. She didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something bigger than her cabin. It was the beginning of a life. A partnership. A quiet, unwavering loyalty from a man who had spent years in silence. Until the day he walked up to her, watched her fight alone, and asked the only question that changed everything. "Need a partner?"